Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Resident Founder podcast. I'm your host, Daniella, an emergency medicine resident doctor, taking you behind the scenes as I'm building my own tech startup called Payscope MD. In addition, on the podcast, I love to bring on other physicians who are building beyond the bedside. And on today, I am very thankful to be joined by Dr. Jason Ryan, cardiology, but most importantly, well known as being the innovative creator and the founder of Boards and Beyond. So with that, Dr. Jason Ryan, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
My pleasure, Danielle. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I think the first things first, Dr. Ryan, is you were one of the first people I actually reached out to when I created the idea of Payscope MD, which once again I'm super appreciative of. But I think that is more of a testament of just how much of willing you are to help students and just people in general. But I think that kind of stems from once again, like I knew you because I went to UConn Medical School and you were faculty on in particular. So tell me a little bit about your journey of choosing medicine, particularly cardiology, and kind of entering the academic space.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. I went to Lehigh University for college. I was a chemical engineering major. I had zero plans to become a doctor. My dad was a chemist. My mom has a master's in chemistry. I thought I'd go into industry or something like that. But then I graduated and actually worked for a year for a company that made plastic pellets, and I sort of didn't really love it. It's a good field. It is the right field for a lot of people, but it was a lot of cubicle work. It was a lot of number crunching, and I just sort of wanted something bigger. I wanted more interaction with people. And I'd had pre-meds in my classes because I took organic chemistry and a lot of things in college that pre-meds took. And so I knew about medical school, but neither of my parents are doctors, so I didn't really have like a trail that I knew to follow. But then after that job, I started looking into other career options, and I got excited about medicine for a lot of the usual reasons. I thought it was great that you could use science. I would still use the chemistry and the things I had learned, but I was directly applying it in a way that I could see the results of what I did every day. So I took the pre-med courses I was missing. I took the MCAT. I had to do a lot of the usual things, but eventually applied and went back to school and went into medicine. And I always tell people the fact that I worked for a year was hugely helpful in medical training because, I just didn't get burned out as much as some people I worked with because I'd seen what it was like to work in the corporate world, and I knew like this was the path I wanted to be on. I didn't have that sort of road less traveled, what would that look like sort of thinking. So it helped me immeasurably to have gone from engineering and an engineering corporate job to medicine before I got here.
Absolutely, it's amazing. And then I think for you, once you started to obviously go down the medical route, got into medical school, when did cardiology kind of spark an interest for you?
Yeah, it was really during my third year of medical school. I didn't understand what a cardiologist was when I started med school. I'd heard the term. I didn't know the difference between cardiology and cardiac surgery. It was all a mystery to me. But in my third year of medical school, just random luck, I was at a site where a half day a week, they assigned each of the medical students to a specialty clinic, and they stuck me in cardiology clinic at the VA in Newington, actually, in Connecticut. And that's where I first saw what the field did and really started to fall in love with it. It was a really good mix of old-fashioned medicine. The doctors knew their patients. They took a history. They did a physical exam. But then also we looked at echocardiograms. We looked at angiograms. We did all this techie sort of modern stuff too. And they were really the end of the line. They saw a lot of patients with problems that had seen other doctors, but they sent them to the cardiologist. They wanted you to figure it out. And I liked that. I think you have to make a choice early on. Do you want to be sort of a jack of all trades or narrow your field in one area? And I was more of the narrowing type of person. And so it all just kind of fit. I didn't decide at that moment I would do it. I considered other things. I loved so many other specialties that I rotated through, but it just stayed in the forefront of my mind. And eventually that's the route I went.
I think it's also important for a lot is like especially pre-med to know because I think sometimes the misconception is like you have to know from the beginning as an M1, and I think
Yeah.
it's great for sure if you know that and you're like, hey, I wanted to be a cardiologist since the time I'm born. Like that's amazing, but I think for a lot of us, including myself, like I didn't choose EM until honestly into fourth year. So I think that's something for a lot of like medical students and pre-meds to understand. Like you don't have to decide like straight from the beginning.
I totally agree. And at UConn, I was a coach, and I had like groups of students every year that I met with and gave career advice to. And many, many more students came to med school with no idea what they wanted to do and figured it out as they went along. It was a much smaller minority of students that came in and from day one said, I want to do something. And they were just gunning for it from the start. And people come in thinking they're going to want to do something and they switch to something else. So, it is totally normal and okay to go to med school unsure of exactly what specialty you want to go into.
Yeah, I agree as well. Like my biggest advice that I always gave to a lot of like starting medical students is like explore as much as you can, like especially coming from UConn where in your first year you do have a good bulk of time to yourself to work on a lot of different things. I always said like explore all the different things, whether it's cardiology, ophthalmology. I always said explore the things that you probably are not going to see on your third and fourth year rotations because you never know if you're going to end up liking it. And so you don't want to necessarily be closed-minded, but just have all the experiences to make the final decision of what you actually want to go into.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, it really is. I mean, I was like a kid in a candy shop in med school. I liked all the specialties. A lot of them I didn't know much about. And I just had a great time touring my way through all of them.
Yeah, I agree as well. I guess now for you, you're well known because of Boards and Beyond, which was the backbone of how I got through medical school. And I know for a lot of medical students across the country. When did Boards and Beyond begin for you?
So I came to UConn when I finished cardiology fellowship. That was 2008. So by 2014, I had sort of like gotten myself to do things at the med school. I went to UConn for med school. So I knew the curriculum, I knew some of the faculty, and I was teaching a few lectures here and running some conferences. And students would shadow me often. They'd ask if they could come to my clinic to see what cardiology was like. And one of the students shadowing me, I started talking to him about how are you studying these days? Do you still use first aid? What books do you use? And he showed me Pathoma, which is a website that is still used by a lot of students. It's a collection of short videos made by a pathologist in Chicago, and it's an outstanding site. Hussein Sattar, who makes the videos, is a great teacher. And the videos were really good teaching of tricky subjects that confuse students. And I also liked the way he taught. It reminded me of the way I like to teach, to break things down into simple, easy to understand, bite-sized pieces of information. And so the student who was in my clinic said, Dr. Ryan, you should do this for the things you teach, because at the time I was teaching heart failure and anticoagulant drugs and things like that. And that was really like a light bulb moment, because the videos on Pathoma, if you ever see them, they're very simple. This is not high tech. This isn't a studio with lights and cameras and all this editing. It was basically a simple PowerPoint slide with a voiceover and a pen. And so I started looking into this and realized that, by 2014, the world of the internet had evolved to a point where the technology was very accessible. For a few $100s, you can make your own videos, and you could do something like post them on YouTube, or you could make your own website. And so because I love teaching and people had told me that they really valued my teaching, I saw this opportunity to create my own teaching website with videos, and eventually it grew to have practice questions and a Q bank. But it started with just videos of me taking complex subjects and explaining them to students. And, luckily for me, it took a long time, but luckily for me, it caught on. It took several years, but eventually it became this thing that people were using, and people were telling other people to check it out. And it really blew my mind how far it went, and became really the defining element of my career, is the teaching I do through Boards and Beyond.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. I didn't know it started honestly from that idea from that one student. I guess
Yep.
when you started deciding of like, hey, I'm gonna, create these videos, did you have in mind how you wanted to start it though? Like, I guess in this case, obviously we knew it blew up, but like originally when you're gonna post it on your website, was it primarily for like the UConn medical students that you're kind of offering for? Was it kind of like open access to anybody who happened to find it?
When I decided to do this, I started looking at different web developers, and I said, what would it take to build a site like Pathoma? Because if you know how Pathoma works, you type in your credit card and they charge you like $100, and then you have access to the site for 3 months or 6 months or whatever. And I said, well, I want to do something like this. And this was the start of an enormously steep learning curve I went on to learn how to build a business, and specifically a web type business. So a website that streams videos behind a paywall and accepts credit card information is incredibly complicated. Like, this is not something you can just build through a website or nowadays ask ChatGPT or something to build. You need an experienced web developer who can tie you into the apps that stream the videos and that take the credit card information and all that. So it probably ended up costing me, around $25,000 to build this website initially off the ground and launch it with around 40 or 50 videos. I did intend it to be for the world. Like, it wasn't just for UConn students, although I owe my life to UConn students because I gave it to them for free and they gave me feedback, good and bad, and many of the ideas that got it from this little shoestring operation in the beginning to a couple years down the road where it was more and more popular came from UConn students giving me feedback. But in the beginning, it wasn't just designed for them, although they were the dominant users because they knew me and I gave it to them for free. And then I just learned. I learned as I went, problems came up, websites crashed, customer service emails came in. I was learning this on the fly. It was a lot of fun. It was super busy because I had a real job and was trying to do this as a side gig. But, and like I said, patience is the key word in entrepreneurship. Very few things take off in a month. You launch it and you've been thinking about it for a year and it's crickets to the world, but then you got to just keep at it and keep doing it. And, luckily for me, it eventually paid off.
Absolutely. And especially on that patient side, how long did it really take you to kind of go from idea to even just launching, even like, let's just say the first like 10 videos?
Yeah, I made 45 or so videos before I launched it. So I launched it in June of 2014, and that was probably like 6 to 9 months after I got the idea. It didn't take that long once I got the idea and decided to go with it. And I actually was worried someone else was going to do this. I thought it was such a doable thing I have imposter syndrome like everyone in medicine. I thought if I can do this, somebody else can do it probably better. So I want to get this out there and, get into the mix. So, probably 6 to 9 months to launch it. But then really, I mean, we're talking, it was at least like 2 years or more before it became really a profitable business. For a long time, it was a labor of love. I gave away a lot of free subscriptions, so it got traffic, but mostly from users who had been given free subs. The number of people paying for a subscription, in the beginning was, early on would be like 3 people a month. And then, it got to be 3 people a week. And then, at some point after a year or two, it reached a point where maybe once every day or two, someone would subscribe, but it was really slow. And keep in mind, during this time, I was spending a lot of time to make more content and run the website. And I was paying people to stream the videos, and you have to pay to sign up for the credit card services. So, it was costing me more money for it to exist than I was making in revenue coming in for a long time. I just had to decide that was something worth it for me to do and to keep going. And luckily, it eventually worked out.
Gotcha. And then did you start primarily focusing on cardiology topics, or was it kind of like a more like generally broad?
In the beginning, I thought it would just be cardiology, kind of like Pathoma was pathology. I thought I would sort of make a cardiology version of that. And I had this idea that because I'm a cardiologist, I can't teach anything that's not cardiology. Like, it wouldn't work. People wouldn't pay for it. I wouldn't be good at it. But the feedback I got, and again, this is where like I owe such a debt to the UConn students, man. I love you guys. Like, they kept telling me, Dr. Ryan, please teach more. Like, we're confused about pulmonary physiology, and you led some of the conferences on that. You could do that. And we're confused on renal physiology, and you've done those conferences. We know you could teach that. And they started showing me how they were learning, and their only options at that time were really these like dense textbooks. They were super confusing. And so like slowly over time, I got the idea that I can teach these other subjects. I'd been a chief resident in internal medicine, and I'd given conferences on lots of random medicine topics. And so I started to realize I could teach more than just cardiology. And I made slides, and I used friends of mine to help me make sure I got things right. And then eventually I started realizing I can just teach all this stuff at a step 1 level. I mean, you don't want me to like manage your dialysis prescription ever. But if you want to know how to calculate the glomerular filtration rate, I might actually be a better person to ask than the nephrologist because they don't ever think about that sort of basic stuff. So, I started realizing I could teach these subjects at a step one level in a way that students would like. And they liked having one teacher. The same guy who taught them cardiology now is teaching them about, the brain stem or whatever, about the endocrine organs. So it became kind of a thing, and I got really into it.
Yeah, and I think also too, like even when you're saying this too, like thinking about on a business perspective, like you were listening to what your users wanted, right? Like you kept getting
Exactly.
feedback of like, hey, like what else should I be doing? Like obviously your expertise comes from cardiology, but then you kind of realize, wait, like there's a whole market here of students who are literally needing to learn of any topic, which I think it's also super important for people to hear. Like, don't just create stuff that you think is helpful, is what the other people think that's really helpful overall as well.
It's a really good
Um,
point. I benefited enormously from working at UConn and interacting with the students during this time because I saw these guys in the cafeteria every day and they'd say, "Oh, Dr. Ryan, thank goodness your EKG lecture was so helpful. I wish you could make a lecture on, whatever, thyroid disease." And I'd be like, "Really?" And they'd say, "Yeah, yeah, we don't get any teaching on this for whatever reason, and it's confusing and it's on our step exams." And I said, "Oh, okay." And this was my audience. I was like seeing them in emails coming into my computer from around the country, but then also like in the cafeteria, in the sushi line, talking about things that the UConn students need. And that's where I got all the ideas from.
Gotcha. Was there ever more of like a moment where you're like, wait a minute, like this is actually finally blowing up after all this time?
Probably around like 2016 or so. The website had been around like 2 years. This just tells you how little I knew about business. But in the beginning, I had one subscription length. It was a year. I think it was $99. And I thought, that's so little money for all these videos. Like, people will buy it. But if you know brains of customers, like if their test is in a month, it bugs people to pay for a year. So somewhere around 2016, a couple of UConn students said, "Dr. Ryan, you got to have like a week and a month and 3 month subscriptions." This had just never dawned on me, right? Like I passed the cardiology boards, but I never thought of this like simple idea. So I asked my programmers and they're like, "Yeah, yeah, we could reprogram that." And so I paid them some money and they programmed it. And that really started to change things because I think at that point, were hearing about the website from their classmates, but then sort of reluctant to subscribe for a year. And once I
Mhm.
had all these options, like over the next like 6 months, it really started to catch on. And I said, "Oh boy, I think this is going to become a thing."
Wow, that's actually amazing. Yeah, and I think it's also interesting to kind of see like your journey of kind of like you kind of had to figure things out as you kind of went along with this. Once again,
Totally.
you kind of built this solo. You didn't really have much of the technical background to build this out. You had web developers to help you, but you figured things out over time, which I think it's also pretty impressive to do this while also having your full-time job as a cardiologist.
Yeah, that's true. It was kind of nuts. But it sort of worked out for a lot of different reasons. I mean, I have friends who this is another thing people ask me about when they're in training, and they say, when I finish training, I have entrepreneurial ideas. What should I do? And I always tell them, like, your first job out of training is really important to choose carefully. I had job offers in private practice for a lot more money than my salary at the University of Connecticut, but I would have been, in at 7:30 in the morning, home at 6, 5, 6 patients every hour, one after another in clinic. And if I'd taken one of those jobs, I don't think I ever would have done this. UConn was a teaching job. It had time for teaching and administration. It was not like a boring job by any means, but it was less intense than private practice life is, at least at the time when I first joined. And that actually ended up making a huge difference. I had enough time to play with my slides during the day, record them on my lunch hour, things like this. It allowed me the freedom to work this sort of thing on the side.
Mm. And then for you, once again, you obviously launched Boards and Beyond back in like 2014, which was like, a new kind of revolution at that time with the internet and so many things that you can develop. Now, as we fast forward to where we are now in 2026, we're seeing that obviously now with AI to where similar to how you were thinking back then of like, wow, like you can create so many things now. I guess, how do you think AI kind of shapes like the education that we see for a lot of students in terms of the ways that they're consuming resources or even how they're just going about studying?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think my journey in relationship with AI is still evolving. When it first came out, it blew me away. Like, if you're honest with yourself as a doctor, you know you can't remember so many things. I mean, there's too many drugs. There's new studies coming out. I don't have time to read. You're constantly operating with some level of awareness that you're doing the right thing. You're doing the best you can, but you're imperfect. And so when I saw AI that like knew all the literature and could remember a zillion drug interactions, I really thought, wow, this is going to change everything. I've started to be more disappointed in the way it has trouble telling you what's important. You know, it will just give you a million ideas, which is wonderful, but 80% of them will be bad ideas, and it won't be able to tell these ones are the best and these ones are not. And so I'm less sure it's ever going to really take over the way people think it will, although who knows. But at least when it comes to studying, most of the students I talk to, they still want someone like me to tell them what's important to know and to kind of check the information that it's accurate and that they're being fed good stuff. They'll go to ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude when they're confused to say, like, can you remind me about something? But when they want to learn right away, they want someone, you know, like you, who's been an emergency medicine resident to say, this matters when you're in the ER and you have a trauma. Or they want someone like me to say, I've been teaching for 10 years and this is what matters for STEP. And I still see this reluctance to trust the AI to just run the show without a human being with some level of experience involved. And so at least that's where I am right now, that I think this human beings like us who have real world experience and aren't just sort of programmed to tell people what they want to hear are still going to be important, at least for a while.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's just more of like that trust layer, like you're just alluding to. Like people still want that human oversight. They want that human connection. And it's always better to hear it from somebody's mouth. And I think even without AI, just in terms of just like how education is, particularly in the medical field, I think that things are definitely changing a lot to where once again, it's now the thing for medical students not to really do lectures, or even if they have lectures, a lot of times they're not paying attention to the lectures. They supplement it with like the boards and beyond, the pathoma. Sketchy was also very popular at the time I was doing medical school as well. So I think there's like this new wave of just like digital products, digital way of learning to supplement what you're kind of being taught.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the model I see working now is, you know, they want an expert like you or me to tell them this is what you need to know and this is what's important. Now they'll go use AI to fill in gaps in their knowledge, to clarify things. But you know, I don't see a willingness, at least from the learners I interact with, to abandon people like us for and just let AI teach them everything. People are still fearful of that, and I think they're right to be fearful of it because, like I said, you know, it's just throwing things at you, not necessarily triaging them and sorting them and letting you know what's important, what's less important, things like that.
Yeah, totally agree. You've obviously since now have had Boards and Beyond acquired from McGraw Hill. How has your role changed for you now?
Yeah, so in 2022, Boards and Beyond had gotten to be too much for me to run. Maybe it was always too much for me to run, but I'd finally come to terms with the fact that this was true. You know, we were dealing with schools wanting to subscribe, and their lawyers wanted us to attest to certain things before they initiate a contract. I had 5 people working for me, so there were contract and HR issues and regulatory things around all that. And I just had reached the point where, you know, I wanted to hand all that over to other people. I'm like a content guy, you know. And so McGraw Hill had reached out to me over the years once or twice and sort of said they'd heard about Boards and Beyond from students. They wanted to know what my thought was. And so in 2022, I started to enter into this negotiation with them and they acquired the company. And it's been awesome. Now I consult for them. I help update content. I help sell the product. They send me to meetings around the world to pitch it to schools. They sent me to the Middle East. I went to Dubai and met students who use Boards and Beyond. It was unreal. So, you know, I've really been able to become just the like content Boards and Beyond guy. And, you know, when there's an issue that involves the lawyers or the HR department, that's got nothing to do with me anymore. So it's been great.
Yeah, no, I love that. And like I said, I think you kind of get to step into like a different part of the business at this point, right? And you kind of get to focus on kind of like back to the beginning of just like focusing on the content and getting that material out there, which I think it's amazing. I think reflecting on your journey to this point to now being on the consulting side, has there been any key business lessons that you've learned along the way?
I think, I mean, one of the biggest one, which is I've told you, is patience. You know, you launch these ideas, and even if it's a great idea, you know, there's just so many things popping up out there now. It's going to take a while for it to catch on. So, and then, you know, you got to keep your eyes open, just like we talked about. The vision I had day one when I launched it, that changed by year one, again by year two, again by year three, you know. So you have to react along the way. And really that's the best you can do. Some of these ideas don't work out. I'm very fortunate. I launched Boards and Beyond. I had the right background at the right time. If I tried to do something like this now, it would be much harder. There's a lot more competitors. The marketplace is more crowded. So you never know how it's going to go. But if you're passionate about it, like, do it, man. It's one of the best things I did in my life, was to go with this idea and start a business. It was so much fun. I'm so glad I did it. And then you just got to see what direction the universe takes you.
Absolutely, I love that advice. And another part of you is you're an author. So you wrote a book called The Gunner. Can you talk a little bit about it in terms of why you decided to write this book, a little bit about what the book is about?
Yeah, sure. So always wanted to be a writer. Kind of funny to say that now after I went to med school, but when I was a kid, my parents read a lot of books. I read a lot of books. You know, I think in a parallel universe, I might have just been a writer and that would have been my whole life. But I went to med school, did Boards and Beyond. But once I sold the company and I had some more free time, I said, I've always wanted to write a book. And the perfect subject to write about is the modern experience of med school. It is just right for storytelling. I don't think people outside the medical world realize how crazy some of the things are that are just part of our system now. And so that's why I wrote this book, The Gunner. It's about a first gen student who gets a scholarship to med school and comes in completely naive and has to learn along the way all the things that go on in medical school, like that students don't go to lecture, they learn from online resources, that if you want to go into a competitive specialty, you need 15 publications, but you have no time to generate 15 publications. These things, you know, anyone who's been through med school kind of knows, but when you look from 10,000 feet, it's really kind of crazy, this world that exists inside of medical school. So all this was just right for a story of a character coming in naive and going through it. It's got all the things students are familiar with, you know, the standardized patients in the OSCEs, the competitiveness with other students who want to go into the very competitive specialties. I poured all these thoughts sort of into this book about medical school.
Yeah, and definitely to the listeners, I'll make sure to have the link down in the description to buy it. I absolutely loved the book. I remember when you first released it. It was probably, I think it was close to going into my fourth year of medical school, and I absolutely loved it. I resonated with it because I am a first generation student. I also was technically on a scholarship in medical school, and I still remember vividly starting medical school and being like, wow, like this is very different of just knowing what I kind of call the hidden curriculum in medicine. Like you just never know. You don't know how to really study. You don't really know, once again, what is an OSCE? What does this mean? I knew nothing about residency, which obviously, like, you go from medical school to residency. I knew nothing about that. Like, just how you mentioned, like, you knew nothing about cardiology. I just didn't even know the path to really become a doctor and how many stuff was going to be integrated in it. So I do remember resonating a lot with the book from that standpoint.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And I mean, you know, like the main character reads the assigned textbooks chapter and does nothing else to prepare for the first exam and fails, which is a
Hmm.
totally accurate thing of what would happen if you did that. Now, luckily, most of you guys are told early on, don't do that. But, you know, like my mom read the book and was shocked to do that was true. And I said, no, this is absolutely true. Like if you just read the syllabus and do what it says to do, you can end up in very deep trouble. You know, there are all these extra things that everyone's doing that aren't standardized. And so these all just made for great stories in the book.
Absolutely. Any thoughts of having additional books in the future?
Yes, I'm working on another book now. It's going to be about a dean who has to oversee a medical school when a student makes a very offensive TikTok that blows up on the internet. Um, and if anyone has been paying attention, there's a lot of
Yeah.
things like this going on right now. If you know anything about med school faculty, this is perfectly right for satire. And we'll see if I can do it in the next 6 months or so. I've been chipping away at it.
That's absolutely amazing. And do for you, technically, from your background and even from you loving writing, do you generally like more of the fiction type of genre?
I read a lot of different books. I mean, it's hard to pin me down. Like I'm reading this book on all these theories of how the universe will end, like the opposite of the Big Bang, big
Hmm.
contraction thing. It's pretty cool. But I read a lot of fiction books too and science fiction. So, really everything. But, they say write what you know. And like, I know a lot about medical school, the good, the bad, the whole thing. I know from you guys because I hear from students around the country. I've been in the faculty meetings and seen what goes on there. And I don't think there's a lot of people writing about this. And I have this audience out here who knows me through Boards and Beyond who might be interested in this. So it just kind of fits and it's really fun for me to write about.
No, I love it. I guess what's next for you? So once again, you're obviously writing. You have Gunner. We're going to be probably coming out with a new version of a book coming out soon. You're doing the consulting for McGraw Hill. Anything else that's going on for you?
I think this is it.
Mm,
I take things one at this point in my life, one year at a time. Like I'm updating Boards and Beyond videos. I'm going to a conference in September and another one in November to talk about Boards and Beyond. And this is like as far ahead as I'm looking. I'm very happy with where I am right now. I don't practice anymore, but I think it's okay. I did that for a long time and I was at a good point to step back. And, I'll just keep doing what I'm doing for as long as I'm able.
No, I love that because I think especially in medicine, and that was another thing I feel like I realized when I entered into medical school, like there's this constant pressure to be chasing the next thing of like, oh, I'm in medical school, I got to get to fourth year, now I need to get into residency, now I need to do a chief year, now I need to do X, Y, and Z fellowship, whatever the case may be. And then sometimes you want to just slow down and kind of enjoy the moment, which once again, medical school training, it's very long. Obviously, with me still being in residency, I realize it's very tiring and can be taxing. And sometimes you just want to relax and enjoy the things that you
I totally agree. I mean, there's a lot of burnout in medicine, and there's a lot of reasons for this. It's a complicated topic, but at least I can tell you for myself, one thing is you sort of get used to always having this thing on the horizon you're gunning
Mhm.
towards. But, at some point you're like 40 years old and there's not another thing to gun for. And you're just left with you and your day to day life. And you've got to enjoy that, in absence of another like thing you're trying to graduate from or accolade you're trying to achieve. And so, figuring out how to just be happy with day to day is a huge key to success in life.
Agreed. And so, Dr. Ryan, where can people find you?
You can find me. I'm on the socials. The place where I have the biggest following is Twitter. Now it's called X. But you can find me on Instagram and TikTok. I have a YouTube channel that's kind of blown up lately. There are these free 120 step questions that the MBME releases. And I've made these little 3 or 4 minute videos for each question to explain how I think it through. They've gotten really popular because people like hearing me say, like, this is how I come up with the answer and compare it to what they're thinking. So I have a lot of subscribers and followers on my YouTube channel. And then, like you said, my big thing now is, the Gunner, the sales are strong and I want to keep it going. And we'll see if I can transition into writing a second book.
Absolutely. I love it. So once again, to the people watching on YouTube and also for the listeners, I'll have the link for Dr. Ryan's socials down in the description. I'll also make sure I have the link for the Gunner book as well. And so with that being said, Dr. Ryan, thank you so much for joining me on the Resident Podcast.
Thank you, Danielle. It's been great.